Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're really digging into Senator Pauline Hanson's pretty scathing critique of how Australia is handling national security and extremism. We're going to go through her arguments piece by piece to try and get a handle on why she's so convinced that she's the only one with the real solution. So that's the central claim right there. And wow, it's a bold one, isn't it? The only one. I mean, that's a huge statement. So you got to ask, how does she back that up? Well, let's unpack it, starting with her direct critique of the country's leadership. Okay, so Hanson's argument kicks off with some really sharp criticism, and it's aimed squarely at the Prime Minister, but also more broadly at both of the major political parties. All right, so according to Hanson, you know that moment when the Prime Minister admitted that maybe more could have been done? Well, she doesn't see that as some sincere moment of reflection. Nope. She frames it as, and these are her words, a pathetic response. She basically argues it only happened because of intense public pressure. This slide really gets to the core of her argument. You can see she's painting this picture of a huge disconnect. So on one side, you've got what she portrays as a government that's weak, insincere, and just plain terrified of offending anyone. And on the other side, well, she describes a public that's angry, doesn't trust the leaders anymore, and has basically run out of time and patience. For her, that giant gap between the two, that's where the real failure of leadership is. And she's really clear that this isn't just a one-party problem. As she sees it, both Labour and the coalition are failing to lead. Why? Because they're way more focused on getting votes than they are on making the tough, necessary decisions. She argues this kind of political tiptoeing is causing them to completely miss what she calls the writing on the wall. So, if she thinks the leadership is failing, what about the actual policies being proposed to fix things? Well, that brings us right to her critique of the government's solutions, where she basically asks, are we even focused on the right stuff here? Okay, so after a recent violent incident, the government's focus immediately pivots to gun laws. But for Hanson, that move just begs a huge question. Is that really the problem here? She pretty much dismisses that whole debate on gun laws as a deflection. Her core point is this. The problem isn't the weapon, it's the ideology of the person holding it. She actually turns the blame right back on the government, pointing to what she calls licensing failures. And she makes the argument that people who are determined to cause harm will always find a way, even pointing out reports that the people involved had 3 bombs in their car. All right, next up, she turns her attention to another proposed solution, bringing in new laws around hate speech. And, well, she's got some doubts. Now, her take on these hate speech laws is actually pretty nuanced. I mean, on the one hand, she does seem to support clamping down on speech that actually creates violence. But on the other hand, she's really skeptical that the government will actually follow it through. Plus, she's worried that any new laws could end up being so broad that they'd be damaging to the Australian people, affecting the free speech of regular folk. So this whole critique of their policies, it all leads to what Hanson seems to think is the biggest failure of them all, a huge misallocation of resources. From her perspective, the country's national security priorities are just completely backward. And this table here really illustrates her point in a nutshell. She claims that while something like $300 million are being spent to prosecute Ben Roberts-Smith and 18 SAS fighters, the agencies that are supposed to be monitoring true radicals are so underfunded they can only watch about half the people on their list. We're talking only having enough people to watch about 100 individuals when there's a need to watch around 200. That's a huge gap. So you take all of these criticisms together, the leadership, the policy focus, the resource allocation, and it all builds up to her final argument, positioning her party, One Nation, as the only one with the actual will to do something about it. And this really brings her argument full circle. She positions One Nation as the only party that's going to deal with this very strongly. She says they've been calling it out for years, while other parties will never go far enough. And her final warning? If we don't take this decisive action she's proposing, the whole issue is just going to get swept under the carpet again. And just to underscore how serious she thinks this all is, Hanson frames the stakes as being about nothing less than the future of the country. She expresses this deep fear for what's ahead if her warnings are just ignored. So when you boil it all down, what you should take away from this is that the source material really lays out a fierce debate over national security. It's this clash, right? A clash between focusing on specific things like weapons and laws versus focusing on ideology and how we allocate our resources. And it really leaves us all with a pretty provocative question to think about. In a world with limited money and people, how on earth should a nation's leaders decide which threats to prioritize over others?